Is your head spinning from all the compressor plugin options that are out there? Which ones are good? Which compressor should I use and on what? I'm gonna walk you through my favorite go-to compressors and why and how I use them and what I use them on. Let's get into it. Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Joe Sidoti here. Now, before we dive into the individual instruments, let's talk about some of the reasons why you would use a compressor in the first place. Well, first, obviously, is to control dynamics. Sometimes, a track can just be all over the place and you just can't find a spot for it in the mix. So, you would use compression to control its dynamics and to find its place in the mix. Or you just want to change the tonality of the sound. Maybe you just want it to sound different, and certain compressors will give it a texture or a color, and that's another reason why you would use compression. Look, this is barely going to scratch the surface of the types of compressors that you could use. But this video isn't meant to be a deep technical dive into how these compressors work, but just to show you what my go-to compressors are and what I use them on. In the vast sea of seemingly endless amounts of plugins that are out there, this video is an attempt to have you cut through all of the junk. If you're looking for someone that you trust, and maybe that's me, who says, use these are good, then that's what I want you to get out of this video. You're gonna see that just about every compressor emulation that I'm gonna show you is a vintage compressor. And that's not by mistake. When I got my start in recording and mixing, that's the gear we had to use. And it's proven itself time and time again to be some of the best musical sounding compressors that money can buy. And all of these digital emulations have gotten so good, it's amazing. If you were to go out and buy the hardware versions of all these vintage plugins, it would cost you tens of thousands of dollars. And now, thanks to technology, you can put one on just about every track if you want, and I just think that that's awesome. And there's a lot of killer plugins out there that do all sorts of really cool things. But if you're just getting started, there could be so many settings and options that it's confusing and you're not sure what to do. And that's another reason why I like these vintage emulations, is because they're very simple. 2 or 4 knobs and maybe a button is all you need to make things sound killer. Matter of fact, most of them make your music sound better just running through it. And that's because of nonlinearities and distortion and other things that cause it to have more character. So with that covered, let's dive into talking about what compressors I use and on what instruments. Let's start with guitar. Guitar can have very little dynamics, especially distorted guitar. So why compress it? Well, for starters, sometimes you've got a dense mix and you've got this guitar part and you're trying to make it fit. Maybe it's like a lead or a little kind of a hook thing, and no matter what you do, it's getting lost. So sometimes compression will allow you to kind of push it forward and get it to sit right where you want it by simply adding some compression. And the other reason why I would use compression on a guitar that is already kind of squashed would be for the tonal change. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes electric guitar can get harsh and can sound like it wants to rip your face off. And some compressors are really good at smoothing out those high mids that can really get annoying quick. So my go-to compressor on electric guitar and acoustic guitar really is the LA3A. I use the CLA from Waves, but there's other manufacturers who make emulations of the 3A as well. This compressor just works on electric guitar for me. It pushes it into the mix and it adds more sustain on long held out notes. And it really warms up the guitar in my opinion too. It's really my go-to compressor for electric, and you really can't screw it up. Let's check it out. It's just dial in the level and set the output and drive however much gain reduction you want, or just until it sounds the way you want, and that's it. This is your output gain. This is your peak reduction. Lowering the threshold, raising the threshold. That's it. Okay, next, let's talk about bass guitar. My go-to compressor for the bass is a distressor. Now, I use the distressor that comes with the virtual mix rack from Slate. Again, there are other manufacturers who make a distressor plugin, but the Slate one is the one that I use, and I think it's phenomenal. First off, it sounds exactly like the real distressor, and I am blown away by how great this thing is. If you don't have a distressor, then my go-to compressor for bass would be probably an LA2A. But since I have the distressor, let me show you how I typically use it on bass. I'll typically start with a 10:1 ratio and the distortion on 2. Now I put the attack at 0 and the attack at 10 and the release at 0, which then when you have the 10:1 ratio puts it in an opto mode, which is my favorite setting on bass. I'll also use this high pass button. And if you weren't aware, what this means is it's gonna not allow the bottom end to affect the threshold of the compressor. So it's gonna let the highs pass through into the detector, but not the lows. So this way you can maintain the bottom end and just compress more of the low mids and the mids. And then drive that into distortion. And it'll give you a really nice growl. Just be sure that your output isn't making up more gain than needed. You know, bypass the compressor and then put it back in and make sure that your output is set appropriately. I actually have a couple of videos talking all about bass guitar and how to get a killer bass tone and how to be able to hear it on small speakers. I'll link to those below and up above, so check those out. For keys and piano, the most important thing to me is it not sound pokey and that I don't have to automate it a whole bunch. I want to find the right spot and let it just sit there. Now, for piano, depending on the genre of the song, you may want it warmer or you may want it a little bit brighter, and depending on that, I'll choose a specific compressor. When I want a keyboard or a piano to really stand out and cut through a dense mix, then I'll use an 1176. Again, lots of manufacturers, countless manufacturers have an emulation of an 1176. And honestly, just like the real analog pieces of gear, they all sound slightly different. So I don't think there's one that's better than another because there's no one 1176 that sounds exactly like another 1176. So to me, it's a matter of finding the one that does what you want it to do to the track. For me, when I want a piano to cut through a rock mix, I'll use the CLA 1176 Blueface. The most important thing you need to know about an 1176 is that its attack time is stupid fast. So you want to be very careful to have your attack time not too far to the left, in this case, which is fast, or to the right, which is slow. You want to be careful not to chop off too much of the transient. In all honesty, I start with this piano preset. Where are you? Boom. And I'll just adjust it from there. And on the input, to get the amount of gain reduction that makes it sound right to me. As far as when I want a piano to sound warmer, I'll typically just switch to the blackface, which, it's less aggressive, and I'll do a little less gain reduction, and then I'll lean on EQ to change the curve that I'm going for. For vocals, man, that's a tough one because, there's different mics, different voices, different tones, different styles of singing. Is it long held out notes? Is it rap? Is it a lead vocal, background vocal? I mean, there's a lot of things to consider when you're compressing a vocal mic. With a gun to my head, my go-to vocal compressor that will really never steer you wrong is, again, the 1176. The key to an 1176 on vocals is your attack and release times. You've got to listen. You got to see how quickly it's attacking those transients and whether it's chopping off more than you want. And you got to see, if it's releasing in time to the song, not to cause a pumping sound. And that depends on how long the notes are held out. So, just to show you another example of an 1176, let's take a look at the Slate FG116. So here you can see, other than the fact it's now vertical instead of horizontal, the knobs are the same, but with one main difference on the Slate version, and it's this mix knob. This allows you to dial in how much of the wet signal you're hearing, how much of the compressor. So you could really drive it harder than maybe you would, and then dial this mix knob back, which is gonna allow some of the original dry through, thus giving you a parallel compression. And the same would apply to this plugin in the key thing being the attack and the release time. So I'm probably gonna start with the attack about here, let's see, here at 3, and the release about here. You kinda can't screw up a vocal with the attack at 3 and the release at 7, and just drive in as much as you need and make sure that you're matching the output. Drums. Okay, where do you start with drums? Well, I'm pretty passionate about drums because I am a drummer, and to me, what makes or breaks a great sounding record is the drums. So rather than go through each individual drum and how I might compress each one, I'm gonna kind of give a global view of what compressors work well on just about anything to do with the drum kit. Since drums are a percussive transient type of an instrument, you want to make sure that you're not cutting off those transients. Here's an example. So you want your snare drum to sound really big, then you don't want to cut off the initial transient. What you want to do is clamp down after the transient to expand and make the rest of that hit bigger and have more sustain. So you want to find compressors that are a little bit slower with the attack. So let me show you some compressors that I would use on drums in no particular order. First is the DBX 160. This is a great compressor for things like kick drum and snare drum because you can be very subtle with its compression, and its over easy approach, really just kind of helps glue the hits together to sound more consistent. So depending on the song and obviously the player, the 160 works great on snare, toms, kick, and overheads. Just set your ratio and adjust the threshold. You really don't need more than 2 or 3 dB to have this thing bring some vibe. If you expand this here, you can also do the parallel thing with the mix knob. Another great compressor for drums is, again, the distressor. The reason why the distressor is one of my favorite compressors is because it's so versatile. It can be a clean sounding compressor, or it can be a dirty, nasty sounding compressor. Its attack and release settings are vast and can be adjusted to suit just about anything. As far as how I set the distressor for drums, I would say it's safe to start with the attack and the release at 5, and to start just making small adjustments from there and see how it affects your drums. Remembering, again, always bypass the plugin and make sure that your output gain isn't adding too much volume. And finally, on drums, I use a lot the Softube Console 1, which is an emulation of the SSL 4K. Now, on an actual SSL channel compressor, your attack is either fast or slow. And on the Console 1, you actually can go in between fast and slow. But I typically will either go to its fastest or its slowest. So I'm more actually, closely emulating an actual SSL console. And I'll typically keep the release pretty fast, but you can mess with that a little bit. But I'll usually keep it about here. One of the best things about the SSL compressor is that it has an auto gain compensation. So there's no output level for the compressor. You just drive into compression as much as you want, and it'll just adjust the output to match the level that's coming in. So you don't have to worry about adding more volume. As for everything else, percussion, violin, horns, things of that nature, I pretty much just stick to the SSL compressor on my Console 1. Not because it's generic, but because it really is a versatile compressor that works on just about anything. Now, if you don't have any of these plugins, obviously you can go out and get them. Slate's has the Everything Bundle, which is very reasonably priced. And Waves has even come out with some different levels of subscription. But if all you're using is the compressors that come with your DAW, then hit me up in the comments below with questions that you have specific to what instrument you're struggling with, what DAW you're using, and which compressor you're using, and I'll be happy to share some tips with you on your case-by-case scenario. Well guys, if you got something out of this video, and if you want to see more videos like this, if you like what you heard, then hit that thumbs up button and subscribe to the channel. And click the bell to be notified when I release new videos. All right guys, we'll see you on the next video. If you like this video, then click that like button, I appreciate it. And subscribe to the channel and help support Sidoti Sound. And click that bell if you want to be notified when I release new videos. And of course, you can find me on all sorts of social media, so be sure to check that out. If you'd like to work with me on an upcoming project, then make sure to visit SidotiSound.com for more information. All right guys, thanks a lot.